Hey guys, how's it going? Arvin here. Today I'm going to be talking about 3 digital painting tips for beginners. So let's get started. Okay, now before we get into the actual digital painting and talking about the tips, what I'm going to do is take an older digital painting that I posted up a couple of weeks ago on the Star Wars X-Wing fighter, and then we're going to talk about those tips and just my basic approach when I started digital painting or any kind of a drawing or anything like that. I think digital painting can be tough, especially if you've never used the tools before. And hopefully the approach that I'm going to be giving you today is just going to help you get started a little bit. If not, there are a lot of other videos that I've got on digital painting, so be sure to subscribe to this channel and make sure you let me know what you think. And if you have any other ideas, please comment below, and then I'll be sure to create some content that is generated to your interest. So with that, let's get started. Alright, I'm really excited because you know what? This is Star Wars, and you know what? My kids are just crazy about Star Wars. So that's one of the other reasons why I created this image. Another thing I gotta tell you is just we've just been so geeked about The Mandalorian and the Book of Boba Fett and all the cool Star Wars related content and TV shows that are coming out on Disney Plus. So it just brings about a whole new level of excitement for me, and I just love now painting these subjects. So anyway, to start off, I'm going to be talking about our first tip when we get started with digital painting. And you see I have my reference image here in the top right corner. And sometimes, you know, when you start something like this, things can get kind of daunting at the beginning, right? Because there's like so many details, you don't really know where to start. So my first tip is to use and study photo references. You have to have some sort of an image to start off with before you dive into getting into too many details or things like that. And part of the things that you want to do when you start to paint digitally or to look at a photo reference is to just understand the photo, understand the image. And the things that I do when I look at an image is I kind of size up what are the subjects that I'm looking at. You know, how large are the subjects? What's the scale of the for instance, the TIE fighter here, you know, what is the size of the TIE fighter relative to everything else on the page? So I have a sense of and an idea of how I want to scale the image and how I want to replicate it and where do I want to put my focus when I start to paint. And the other thing here is also just looking at all the color variants. Now, one of the tricks that I always use is that if I squint my eyes, or if you squint your eyes and you kind of blur the image, you do this so you can kind of get rid of all the details, because the details can be really intimidating because your mind is trying to process all that information, and when you're just starting out, it gets really confusing and it actually just gets in the way. So the objective here is to, you know, block things into these, you know, larger shapes and understand the scale. And then you need to look at all the different kinds of colors that you see on the image. And the first thing I used to do when I started off in digital painting is I just used a color picker, because, you know, at that time I just didn't really know how to assess color and decide what's the right color for an object. So the color picker tool was what I used just to kind of get started. And then over time, as I started to practice, I would be able to see how those colors relate and start to choose the colors on my own. Now, the second tip I want to talk about when I start to do digital paintings is to define the shapes and the silhouettes. Now, what does that even mean? What are we talking about here? Well, if you zoom out on an image and you study the image, you look at the images, and like I said, if you start to blur your image, whether you do it digitally or you just observe it and you squint your eyes, you're going to be able to observe these shapes. And one of the things that you want to identify is to be able to see the high contrast areas so that you're understanding those shapes and then start to replicate those images just by focusing on the shapes. Because if you don't do this, what happens is that you get caught up and you get intimidated by all the details that you're seeing on the image. When you start to associate the details with actual objects, if you say, hey, this is an X-wing fighter, or this is an apple, or this is a pear, or this is an automobile, or whatever it is, whatever the object is, and you associate it by the actual name of the object, what happens is that you're so wrapped up into making sure that your image is going to look exactly like the object that causes a lot of anxiety for you. Because when you're replicating an image, you want it to look correct. This is another reason why some people actually turn their drawings upside down, or they flip-flop it, or when they're replicating something, if they don't know what it is that they're actually drawing, they'll find that just by observation, they can replicate the picture pretty well, because they're not associating that object by the actual, physical name of that object. So instead of drawing a nose, it's just a shape. So that's what you need to do here. Anytime that you start a digital painting, your idea, or the idea behind this, is to observe the picture and the shapes around the picture. All right? So that said, let's talk about tip number 3. Use simple brushes. So it gets very tempting when you start off digitally painting that you get wrapped up with some of the pros and the brushes that they're using and creating all these great nice looking effects. And let me tell you, that's all a big mistake. You don't want to start using specialized brushes, because you got to remember, all this stuff is nothing more than a tool for you. It's just a tool for you to communicate an idea. And as your skills grow, you can start to experiment with different kinds of brushes. In fact, there's so many professional artists out there that don't even use specialized brushes. They just use the basic round brush, and they're able to create amazing images. I love specialized brushes only because sometimes I want a very painterly look, or I want to see the brush strokes, and I want to create something that looks somewhat analog, or if there's things like smoke, I wanted to have look a little bit more realistic. That's kind of the reasoning why sometimes I will use some specialized brushes. So those are my 3 tips on digital painting for beginners. I hope you enjoyed it and you find this content valuable. Get out there, experiment, and start painting, and I'll see you here next week on Driven to Draw. Thanks for watching, guys.